Teachers of Reddit, what are your worst experiences with helicopter parents? I had a student a few years ago whose mom would email all his teachers every single day wanting to know what we had done in class. We have websites with class calendars on them. It got so bad that the school eventually told her that she could only email once a week. Later that year, the student turned in a research paper, and the first paragraph had been stolen word for word from a website. I printed out the web page, gave the kid a 0, and wrote a referral for cheating. Hours later, the mom emails me furious that I would accuse her son of cheating. I explained the situation, and she told me it wasn't his fault. He had been too busy to type it, so I did it for him. I wanted to spruce up the intro a little bit, so I added that little extra bit. I guess I forgot to add the source. Seems legit. She fails too. I was working with a class of gifted high school students taking a summer course. During a field trip, one of my students needed to go to a doctor's appointment and would be picked up early by her parents. The only way to contact the group on the field trip was my cell phone, so the parents got my personal number. In the week left in the summer course, I received 23 text messages and 15 calls asking why their 10th grade daughter had not called them back. Freshman year of college, my roommate's mother was a helicopter mom, to an extreme. We weren't friends, just roommates, but I heard stories from multiple people. One morning around 7 AM I hear a pounding on the door. I pull my butt out of bed and open it only to see her mother standing there looking beyond furious. Apparently she found out somehow that my roommate had been skipping one of her classes. She had driven 2 hours to show up at our door at 7 AM to scream at her 18-year-old daughter. She also yelled at me for a few minutes for not waking up my roommate, not telling her to go class. I left pretty quickly and spent the rest of the day hiding out in friends' dorm rooms. The 8th graders at my middle school used to take a trip to a theme park or something every year, but you weren't allowed to go if you were failing any of your classes. Well, some kid's mom called and whined that her kid couldn't go because he was failing, and it was discriminatory towards him and ended up getting the trip cancelled for everyone. Must have made that kid the most popular kid in school. I taught ESL to a bunch of high schoolers, many of which were at unsat level. There was this one kid who was incredibly fluent and would write wonderful essays in my class. However, his mother wasn't satisfied. She forced him to write a 10,000-word essay every single day. Now, she had never learned a foreign language, didn't speak English. I don't think she even graduated from college, but she would, through her son and other translators, give me an earful on how I was being too easy on the students because I wasn't making them do 4 hours of homework a night. And this poor kid, this unfortunate 14-year-old bastard who was fluent in 2 languages and was ready to take the SATs in a language not his own, ended up getting worse and worse at writing. He would repeat things again and again just to get the word count, because his mother would check the essays every night. Well, she'd check the numbers. She wouldn't be able to read the paper. He would lie and make up stories, interjecting them at weird places. He did absolutely miserably in his exams because he wouldn't take my advice to stop writing when you've run out of things to say. I teach middle school English at a public school in Texas. I brought a mom in several months ago to discuss how her son had been plagiarizing. Poorly, I might add. But she only wanted to talk about his acting career. She pulled out a leather-bound portfolio stuffed with acting modeling photos of her little angel and talked at me for an hour about each one. Cut to this week. He turns in a paper about his strongest childhood memory. It's a 2-page summary of every famous person he's acted with and what movies I would know them from now. Looking at the writing style and level of detail, the mom clearly wrote the essay. WTF. Teaching 2nd grade, we took a field trip to our district's vocational school so the kids could get a sense for the wide array of career choices available. One parent would not allow her daughter to attend because she was so afraid her daughter might take a liking to one of the non-collegiate career tracks, horticulture, culinary arts, etc., and ruin her predestined path to medical school. 2nd grade. I am a percussion coach for a youth band program at the local university. While chatting with the kid's mom for the first time, she wrote down notes on me and my coworker. The kid later told me that she compiles personality profiles of every person that is ever in charge of her kids. When first visiting colleges, one of the stories our tour guide told us was of how this kid's mom moved in as his roommate for an entire semester. I have a student's mother who emails me about once a week to try and scavenge extra information about what her son should write for his assignment. She's got the criteria sheet and the reading list, yet she's still never gotten above a B. Because she's actually quite a crappy writer, it's nearly impossible to prove that it's her writing his assignments without one of them admitting it, but the whole staff room knows the truth. Had a student last year where his mother was always claiming he had some health issue that was pretty serious. While I hate calling people liars, she would make it obvious. The best example I can give is her claiming he had severe asthma. I made every accommodation I could for this kid, including every time he complained of chest pains I would send him to the nurse immediately. I began to wonder when I would see him at recess running around like a maniac without any complaints. He only got chest pains during a test or whenever it was convenient for him. Never questioned it because I just didn't want to even try to argue. Another example is during science we were playing on microscopes and he thought it would be okay to just run around the room. Of course I kicked him out and told him he flunked science. Well, at the end of the day I had a change of heart and made him read a chapter out of the science book and write a summary for homework. The next day he comes in with this elaborate 3D model of the chapter and his summary is written in pen and the writing looks like a grown woman's, not a 4th grade boy. I ask him to tell me about the chapter and of course he can't, so I call his mom. She proceeds to tell me that he spent hours on this thing and she watched him do it. I call her out and explain he can't tell me anything. She admits she helped but feels there's nothing wrong with her writing for him or constructing the model. She was and still is psycho. She called me last week asking for $30 for rent money. I can't wait until he goes to middle school. A student handed in a quiz completely blank. I asked her why, and she replied I didn't read and smiled. I told her to write I didn't read on the quiz so there would be no misunderstanding. She did. I emailed her mom because the quiz caused her grade to drop from a low C to a D+, and we have to contact parents of students with D's or F's. Her mom went absolutely nuts. How can any teacher in good conscience allow a student to receive a 0? I thought you were supposed to guide her and support her. She demanded that I give her daughter at least 50 points. Just because. We pulled a child who was allergic to eggs out of a lab in which eggshells were broken down by vinegar. Then the eggs were placed in hypertonic solutions to illustrate cell membrane action. The parent flipped a crap that his child missed 2 lab periods, although we'd prepared handouts, gone over the relevant info with the kid, and sent him along to the library so he wouldn't die of anaphylactic shock. Geez, we're trying to save your kid's life. Here, 2 lab periods in the 7th grade won't make a big diff. My aunt works in the housing department at UW-Madison. She once fielded a call from a woman who wanted to know who would be making her daughter's bed and how much they would be charging. I believe my aunt and her co-workers decided $200 a week was a high enough price to get the lady to frick off, but she agreed to pay it. No idea what happened next. Hopefully there's a happy ending and some broke-about kid got $200 a week making some rich girl's bed. My freshman year roommate's parents would drive down to school every time their daughter didn't answer their calls. Made for a couple of awkward Friday nights. Not a teacher but a witness to helicopter stage momming. When I was in high school, the director of the musicals always cast her daughter as the lead in every play even though she was awful. I challenged her on it when I was elected vice president of the club, which was a student vote she had no control of, and I was never cast in a show again. Flash forward to this girl getting accepted to college. The mom applies for a teaching job in the theater department of the school she is attending. I hate that woman to this day. Ladies and gentlemen, a slight change in tonight's performance of Les Miserables. Every character will now be played by Stephanie. That is all. My kids are in a small private school with about 100 students. Last year this mom was all in everyone's face about bringing food with peanuts to school because her 5th grader was allergic. I can understand that for shared classroom treats, but she was determined to make the whole school nut free. She volunteers there a lot. I'm pretty sure just so she can stay in her kid's business. She bitched me out one day because my 1st grader had a PB&J for lunch. Those classes don't even have lunch at the same time. I told her that if a 5th grader was somehow stealing my kid's lunch I would pack extra peanuts every time. She bitched to the principal. who told me I said what she wished she could. Fast forward to this year and come to find out the kid isn't even allergic to freaking nuts. I teach kindergarten at a private school that severely sucks up to parents. I gave my students a fun Halloween activity that was basically a color by number on a hundreds chart. If they followed the directions, it turned out to be a monster. I hung them up for parents to see and one of the moms saw her daughter's paper and was so disappointed and told me, "She can color better than that, you just have to push her. She's 5 and it was supposed to be fun." I once sent a project home with 2 grades, one for the student and one for the parent. Teacher at a private school in South Korea here. Every one of my students' parents is a CH-47 Chinook of a parent. So the courses I teach are specifically geared for the students who want to study in the United States during college. I teach classes to prepare them for the SATs. I teach English conversation to help them be more fluent, although most of them were pretty good with English to begin with. And I teach in an American university style to help them get used to the format. The thing is, I essentially have no control over grades. In principle I do because they are my classes, but the reality is totally different. Because it's a private school, every one of the parents pays money to get their kids in and pay a whole lot more for them to be part of this international program. This means that if their kid isn't doing well, they have a pretty good chance of packing them up and taking them to a competing school. So because of this, every one of my students gets near perfect grades. Not because they earned them, but because my principal has flat out told me that they all have to pass and do well even if they only ever sleep in class, and about half of them do. I had a parent come in with their child a year ago with one of those Wi-Fi cell phone radiation detector thingies, and during the first 5 minutes of class walked around the room, him in tow. She finally pointed to a seat for him to sit in, and then came up to me and asked if there was any way I could make the building maintenance staff aware that the radiation levels were still quite high. Also, had a different parent year before that ask me to not use both the chalkboard and whiteboard in any class. I can understand the chalkboard during class, because I have had kids with asthma who react, but the whiteboard? And ever? How did she expect me to teach? One of my mom's teacher colleagues had a parent call and complain because the teacher had written a note to the student in red pen. Apparently using the red pen came off as aggressive. I'm not a teacher, but I'm in high school and I directed some of the kids in my school's middle school division in a play of Treasure Island. One day, when we weren't allowed access into the theater, we did a rehearsal at the house of this girl, let's call her G. Her mother, let's call her M, invited us to come over. And at first I was wary as something always seemed a bit off about her, like she was always in an insane rush to get her daughter home after all of our regular rehearsals. But they had a very large house and I didn't want to give up the space, so I agreed to do the rehearsal there. Once we were there, M politely greeted us, but G was holed up in her room. I asked if she could come and join us, but M kept insisting we start the rehearsal without her. I explained to her that G was one of the most important parts of the play, and it would be hard to practice without her, but M just kept saying that she had work to do and wasn't available. Finally, after about half an hour, G came out to meet us, but her crazy mother told us that she could only stay for 15 minutes and then she had to go back to her work. G then turned to her mother and said, "I don't have any work," to which M responded, "Yes you do, sweetie," in the most passive-aggressive way I've ever heard someone talk to their child. I decided to stay out of it, and we started rehearsing with her. I then opened my laptop to show them a video of what they did, but M happened to be walking past at the time, and she ran over and slammed my laptop, slid down, shouting "no media" repeatedly, and then lifted it up and ran away with it somewhere. It was my computer, so I followed her and asked for it back, and she carefully explained that they were a no media family and that it's important that G isn't exposed to that. She then said that her daughter should get back to work anyway, but I said we needed 5 more minutes. When I got back to G, she said, "Isn't my mom so annoying?" and I wasn't sure how to respond, but G saw the uncertainty in my face and kept talking about her mother. It turned out that G wasn't allowed to watch TV, go on any computer, even listen to music on an iPad, just do her schoolwork and read books that had already been read by her parents. She was in 6th grade, so of course she didn't have that much work to do, but her mother would make her study her notes from the day every day, and would frequently make her do homework again as it wasn't long enough. G could have been getting straight A's with less than half of the work she had to do. So I told M that she shouldn't put so much pressure on her daughter, and she responded to that by kicking me out of the house. Her parents got divorced a year later and her father has full custody, and I couldn't be happier. College admission counselor. We get moms pretending to be their daughters all the time over the phone. Uncle was a teacher for 25 years at a fairly prestigious school and told me some fairly unbelievable horror stories. I'll just talk about the one that sticks out in my mind. He had taught several grades and at this point I believe he was teaching a 6th grade class. There was a boy in the class who was very, for lack of a better word, stupid. This isn't uncommon in schools, but this kid was simply thicker than brick and couldn't seem to grasp anything that was being taught to him. Catch 22 is he had a father who was the chief of police in town and mother who worked closely with the mayor. Anyways, my uncle had been teaching a chapter in history and assigning homework for day when the boy stood up and started yelling about how stupid history was and that my uncle was dumb for attempting to teach it to them. Needless to say, the boy was sent to the office for verbally abusing a teacher. This is where the story gets somewhat interesting. While the boy was in the office, he had begun crying and started to fabricate a story about how my uncle had called him an idiot outright in the classroom and that all he did was retort saying, "No, I'm not jerk," or something to that effect. He then began requesting to speak to his parents. Of course the headmaster obliged and let him call his parents and at the same time summoned my uncle to the office to discuss what was going on. 5 minutes later, as my uncle had just finished explaining what had happened, both the boy's parents burst into the office. Guns blazing, if you will. Not literally. The husband attempted to arrest him with his wife basically spitting in my uncle's face as she was yelling at him. All the while their boy was sitting there smiling and apparently laughing as my uncle was taken from the room by the chief of police. All pretty absurd, as you can imagine, with a full room of witnesses and the children. The actual story came to light fairly quickly, but instead of apologizing and trying to save face, the husband began telling a tale of how my uncle had resisted arrest and reacted forcefully and struck him as he was attempting to gain control over him in the office. I found out later that both the parents approached the headmistress after the fact and offered her an ultimatum to agree with what they were saying or they would make her life a living heck, all instead of simply admitting they were wrong. The husband lost his job and the wife was severely demoted to desk clerk after everyone figured she tried to use her position as leverage in the situation. And as if this whole thing wasn't humorous enough, my uncle still swears to this day nailing the headmistress saved my life. Definitely my career. What a lovely man he is. Not a teacher, but my husband is. Ever tried to teach history to the child of parents who are Holocaust deniers? You have been visited by the magical duck. You don't have to do anything. He will simply give you a good day today. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.